to now from Pondicherry to Baroda, the first home of Sri Aurobindo in India. And when he comes back, and we are joined by Dr. Shaurya Brahmbhatt from not only the city of Baroda or Vadodara as it is known today, but also the very institution where Sri Aurobindo spent many years as a teacher, as an educator, as an educational administrator. So Dr. Shaurya Brahmbhatt, I've met him a few times, and it's my real pleasure to introduce him today as one of our guest speakers. So I'll just read out a brief bio of his. He's currently serving as an assistant professor in the Department of English, the Maharaja.
Perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Larry. Namaste, Pradeep ji.
Namaste.
Thank you, Beloo ji, for inviting me for this webinar. And a month back, Beloo ji phoned me and said that, Shaurya, we are planning to have this webinar on Sri Aurobindo, the Seer-poet. So it was always challenging as I belong to a family and an environment where all are in my family are writer, poet, and I have a strong feeling with one thing, that the more simple the topic, the more it difficult to speak on or write upon. So the title is very simple, Sri Aurobindo, seer, poet. So there are three words. With all gratitude, we know the contribution of Sri Aurobindo to English literature. There is another noun, that is the poet. And the adjective used here is seer. So I was talking with Beloo ji in the afternoon that I have prepared myself that I will not quote much lines from Sri Aurobindo's poetry or from Savitri, though it was very difficult after listening to Pradeep ji to stop my temptation reading one of my favorite poem of Sri Aurobindo that I will read at the end of my presentation. But when a topic, such topic is given to someone to speak about, for example, I started thinking that suppose I'm an essay writer, I'm an essayist, and the topic is given to me is sun, that writes something about a sun. So when sun rises and when sun sets in the west, so between that cycle from rising and setting of a sun, sun plays very important role and many roles at the different levels of the existence. Okay, so the very poetic way we can say that it fight against the darkness and all. But there are certain levels, there are certain places where even the sunlight cannot reach. And there is a darkness which we want to eradicate. We want to conquer that darkness. And there is a famous lokokti, the phrase we use in Gujarati, that jana pahunche ravi, tyahan pahunche kavi. So where there is no sun cannot reach, there a poet can reach. So today I will focus more on the part of a poetry and the process of writing poetry. And then at the end of my presentation, I'll read that how we can see that, the way by writing an essay about a sun, we cannot prove the greatness, and the greatness of our sun does not require any certificate from the writer to prove himself, because every day it rises and every day it works. Similarly, to use the word a seer poet and to use the any adjective for Sri Aurobindo as a poet, it is an attempt. And why the way the word is used in this title in the for this webinar, it's perfect in a way that in Indian tradition, the poets are known and are considered as a rishi, and rishi are known as a drashta. So seer means drashta. So drashta means the person who can see. But what does they see? What do they see? They see the physical aspect, the material world, the emotional world, or the world which cannot be seen through the eyes, the physical eyes. So as a teacher of English literature, I teach criticism as well. And in criticism, from Plato to Wordsworth until the modern and the postmodern era, uh, there is a debate on the process of writing, where Plato says that the reality and the truth is somewhere else, and it is twice removed from the reality when the poet writes. So there is no reality in poetry. So this discourse about poetry and the function of poetry, there are ages in the Victorian and especially in the Elizabethan age. There were charges by Stephen Gosson on poetry that poetry should be banished, it does not add anything to the society. So there are so many charges were made on poetry, and again each civilization has to go at the feet of poetry, because poetry has always something to offer, to take one step further in the evolutionary journey that was proven in the history. If we see the history of last 200, 300 years, we see that the material growth, the intellectual growth has exceeded, that was tremendous. But at the cost of what we have achieved, this material prosperity, this material and intellectual growth. And when we see and when we compare uh, the growth of buddhi and the growth of atma, so at the cost of atma jnana, we have achieved this bhautika jnana. So now there is a time in the 21st century where the society, when mankind go again back to poetry for seeking the solution of, or seeking the answer of their buddhi or the problems they face. But the problem here is that the poetry which is written on the different levels, and this is something very important contribution to the uh, English criticism by Sri Aurobindo, by writing and by giving us the future poetry, where he very categorically uh, presented the growth of English poetry, growth and development of English poetry, and then he talked about the nature and the process of writing poetry. And then his entire works as a poet and his contribution in English literature and the gift of Savitri to us, that is the ideal example of future poetry. But when we say and when we are discussing Sri Aurobindo, the poet Sri Aurobindo as a seer, so why we consider him as a drashta? Okay, because when uh, we want something in our day-to-day affairs, when we do not have enough time for oneself, we do not have peace in mind, we do not have a peace and equilibrium in our emotion, and at that time we go to music, we go to cinema to find some relief. But what we get, that is a question. So it is a work of poetry to get something. So mankind and the society seek guidance from the society. So now that there is a problem, there is a question arises. So to give the moral lessons or to guide the society or to guide the nation is the work and is the function of a poet, or to just give delight to the readers is the function of a poet. And that has this has been the debate from ages in the world of literature, that the literature for life's sake and the literature for the art's sake. So art for the art's sake and art for the life's sake, there is a long debate, but we are not going into it. When we are discussing Sri Aurobindo as a seer, Sri Aurobindo writes in future poetry, and I'm referring A.B. Purani's work, Sri Aurobindo Kavya Darshan, where he says that even the minor poets which we see in each age of world literature, they have some opening towards the forces. But such moments come rarely in their process of writing poetry. And it is very difficult for common and the minor poets to translate or to transmit that truth, whatever they have seen. But that is not case with the Mahakavis, because they frequently receive such things. This frequently, the frequency is more than the minor poets. It's and they receive it, and very successfully they can translate that truth into the words. But why society go to the poets? Because poets have a mastery of over language. Okay, so why Sri Aurobindo is a seer poet? So one thing, one aspect about proving, and so we are not here to prove, but which help us to understand the seer poet is that the mastery over the language. So the way he uses language, the way he uses English language, and the way he uses Bengali, if you read some of his stories in Bengali writings. The first thing, that poets has a mastery over the language. Second thing, that the Mahakavi receive those inspirations and they are capable enough that they live in inspiration and with connection with of that with the darshan constantly. So that continuity, that constantness makes their writing more effective and appealing and remains forever. So there are four words which we can, three words we can, come before us when we take one step further after language. That is that a poet sees something. He has a darshan of something, that kavi ne kuch dekha hai. So what he has seen. So is that only the poet who sees? Then the answer is no. Even the philosopher also go and explore for the truth. Scientists also go in the exploration of truth. Prophet also go and explore the truth. But the way of presenting truth are different. The way the philosopher present the truth, the way prophet present the truth, and the way poet present the truth are different. But in Sri Aurobindo's case, he is a prophet and a poet. And the very thing which he talks in future poetry, that when a poet sees something, when he has a I'm not talking about a vision, okay, when he has an experience of a truth, okay, so he must come back, and it is the Sri Aurobindo's yoga. So it's not talk about the nirvana and you experience something and you don't share. you come back and share with others. And that collectivity, that sharing, and that that sharing of joy, and the sharing of the words, and the beauty, the truth which you have seen. So the central idea of seer, of a drashta, is that there is a beauty lies within the truth. So when a poet sees the truth, he also experiences the beauty, he also expresses the beauty. So when that what that satya and what that beauty is, that is the Shiva. And that's why we have this tradition in art and culture of in India, that is Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. क्योंकि सत्य के साथ वो सौंदर्य और शिव तत्व जुड़ा हुआ होता है. That is within aligned with it. So when a poet experiences the truth, beauty and that Shiva Tattva expresses by itself. And whatever we read in the works of Sri Aurobindo, we experience the truth, beauty, and the Shiva Tattva. And those things make Sri Aurobindo a seer poet. In the beginning of this session, Beluji read out some lines from the Canto 3 of Book 1 of Savitri, of Ashwapati's Yoga. Okay. So Ashwapati is a representative of mankind and the problem of mankind. But the way we see a man in the Western world and in the Western literature in the first half of the previous century, disheartened, distressed, destroyed, or the portrait of a man in modern and the postmodern and the era. Here also we see that the man is bound in the material world, but there is something in him which can, which he can break and grow and reach to the summit. So that hope through beauty, through poetry, can be experienced by the poems of Sri Aurobindo. So that is the second argument, or the second point which I can say, that why we see and why we consider Sri Aurobindo a seer poet. So first, that his mastery over language. Second, that he is constantly, we have seen him connected with, because see that there are many levels through which the poet write, from the level of thought, from the level of emotions, from the level of ideology. But here we see, when we read Sri Aurobindo, that he goes beyond all these things, and he bring down something new dimension to look at the world, to look at the mankind, to look at the nation, to look at politics. And that newness, okay, so that newness comes with a new rhythm, that comes with a new forms, okay, and those new forms and the new rhythms are totally different than which are discussed and proposed and practiced in the Western world in the name of a modernism and postmodernism. So seer is a drashta, and I quote A.B. Purani here, that Kavi આપણને સત્યનું દર્શન કરાવે છે. He means that the Kavi helps us to give the darshan of truth. તે સત્યમાં રહેલી સૌંદર્યની શક્તિ વડે, and how he expresses through the beauty lies in the truth. એના પ્રતીકોમાં કે પ્રતીકોની કે જીવનની ક્રિયામાં તે સત્યનું દર્શન કરાવે છે. He presents that truth by using the symbols. Okay, so many times people say that it is very difficult to understand Sri Aurobindo. It's very difficult because the symbol which we use in our film songs, in our day-to-day in a popular literature, and the symbols which are used in such, for example, the work of a prophet, that suppose there is a prophet who has a vision, who has a darshan, who has something to say to the world, and God has given him that duty, divine has given him the duty that this is the message which you have to pass pass on to the mankind. Okay, so the message could be very simple, that you don't worry about your tomorrow. Okay. But how does poet represent the same thing, and that you should not worry about tomorrow? And so the way Valmiki, the way Kalidas, the way Vedavyasa have, these are the Mahakavis, and the way they have uh, uh, pass on the message, the pass on the vision, the pass on the different and the newer dimension to understand the world, makes them the Mahakavi. And similarly, such things which we find in Sri Aurobindo's poetry, and this is how we can say that Sri Aurobindo is the seer poet, because he sees something far, far, far beyond which our eyes cannot see, and for whom he has written, why he has written. That is another problem. That is another question. It's a natural question that rises in our mind, that why. So as I said, that the every day the sun rises and it kills, it destroys the darkness of the world. But there are darkness in our beings, in the matter, and how to overcome that darkness. There Sri Aurobindo's light, the light of his yoga, light of his vision, light of his guidance, can help us to come out from that darkness. And that's why Sri Aurobindo is a seer poet. And at the end, last time also I read the same poem, and I'm again reading the same poem, which helps us to understand that the way Sri Aurobindo has used the language, and the way Sri Aurobindo has presented the vision of poetry, that is Musa Spiritus. So I read out the poem for you. O world, he is addressing to world, Shabda. O world, concealed in the upper fire, thou who has lingered through centuries, descend from thy rapt white desire, plunging through gold eternities, into the gulfs of our nature lab, voice of the space, call of the light, break the seal of matter's sleep. Where you will find such poet who talks about the break of the seal of the matter's sleep? Break the trance of the unseen high, in the uncertain glow of human mind, its waste of unharmonized, thronging thoughts, carve thy epic mountain lined, covered with deep prophetic growths. Let thy hue winged lyrics hover like birds over the swill of the heart's sea. Touch into sight with thy fire words the blind indwelling deity. O muse of the silence. And now see that how he addresses. O muse of the silence, the wideness make in the unplunged stillness that hears thy voice, in the vast mute heavens of the spirit awake, where thy eagles of power flame and rejoice. Out, out with the mind and its candles flares. Light, light the suns that never die. So I talk about the sun. That sun, Suraj to uge ane athmiye jai. So that the sun rises and it sets. But here he aspires about a sun, that is this supramental sun. Light, light the suns that never die, for my ear the cry of the spear stars, and the forms of the gods for my naked eyes, and the forms of the god. Now see that the manifestation, the forms of gods for my naked eyes. Let the little troubled life of God within cast his veil from the still soil. This tiger striped of virtue and sin, this is the life. પાપ પુણ્યની અંદર ભરાયેલું જીવન. This tiger stripes of virtue and sin, his clamor and glamour and toll and dole, all make tranquil, all make free. Let my heart beats measure the footsteps of God as he comes from his timeless infinity to build in their rapture his burning abode. Wave from my life his poem of days. Kavita ક્યાંથી આવે છે? Where from where? Wave from my life his poem of days. His calm, pure dawns and his noons of force. My acts of the groovers of his chariot race. My thoughts for the tramp of his great seeds course. My thoughts for the tramp of his great seeds thought. પ્રભુના સમર્થ અશ્વોને દોડવા માટેની ભૂમિ બની રહો. Let my life be a playground for the sons of God, or the horse of sun to run. So this is what Sri Aurobindo has seen, the truth, the darshan. And along with that darshan, what comes? That is the beauty, that is the Shivatva. When we read Sri Aurobindo's very famous and cherished poem, Who? And the moment we read, along with the darshan of the nature, beauty and the Shivatattva, we experience. So when we experience Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram, all the elements and all the experience of Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram all together, be sure that that line must be written by Sri Aurobindo, the seer poet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaurya ji, and my sincere apologies to you and to everyone. My connection was just cut off as I was introducing you, so I am going to take a few moments before we take any questions from the participants to just read out a little bit about you, so that those of our participants who are not familiar with your just let me just, I already mentioned that how you are joining us from Baroda, and I just received some photographs from Vallabh Vidyanagar, Sri Aurobindo Center, Vallabh Vidyanagar, that they are live streaming this program. So I forgot to mention at the beginning. So we are joined by several other people from Vallabh Vidyanagar who are watching this program. So I want to just also take this opportunity to welcome all of them at this webinar. So as I was saying before my connection got cut off, Dr. Shaurya is serving as assistant professor at the Department of English, the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda at Vadodara. And he's part of the same Faculty of Arts, which was the erstwhile Baroda College, where Sri Aurobindo had taught English and French for many years. And as I mentioned, he's also the coordinator for the university's Center for Sri Aurobindo studies, and he has a special privilege to look after the room which Sri Aurobindo occupied. So I had the great honor and privilege to walk with him to that room, to spend about half an hour just meditating and feeling the presence, living presence of Sri Aurobindo there. As we already heard him, he has great interest in Sri Aurobindo's poetry and poetics, especially Savitri, and he's been researching on the Aurobindonian school of thought, the poets of Sri Aurobindonian school of thought, with particular reference to the works of K.D. Setna, Pooja Lalji, Sundaram, A.B. Purani and many others. So he beautifully blends Gujarati and English literature in his passion for poetry and literature. So really beautiful. I'm glad I caught most of your talk. So my connection came back to, I guess Mother is very, very compassionate and kind today with all the troubles we are having with internet and technology after the aftermath of cyclone. So things are still moving along pretty well for us. So I just want to make one reference, one point, and then maybe we can take one or two questions before we invite our next speaker, Larry. Towards the end, Shaurya ji, you mentioned the poem Who. And, there is one particular line in that poem, which to me is the perfect example of that seer, the drishti, where Sri Aurobindo writes, "The hand that sent Jupiter spinning through heaven spends all its eternity fashioning a curl." So it's that seer, for in his drishti, fashioning of one's curl is the same work. I mean, it's like, in the God's drishti, in Sri Aurobindo's drishti, the same hand that looks after Jupiter spinning through the heavens is responsible for the delight one finds in fashioning a curl. So the equal drishti, the equal vision of the seer, of the drashta, of the divine. I mean, that one line for me just captures it so beautifully, so perfectly. So I want to thank you for pointing that poem.
In that poem, each line,
Yes.
so where is he? He is in the flesh of a child and the
Yes.
eyes of a lover. So everywhere he is there. So who can
Yes.
see that? So experiencing that and then translating it into, so that's beauty, truth, and Shiva Tattva comes together, and that is the seer poet.
Yes, yes, the blush of a girl. So, right. So we have few words of appreciation for you here, Shaurya ji, from Uma. Humbled to know you, Shaurya ji, through Beloo ji, and you carry on the essence of Baroda College. And I guess there were one or two, yes. Anagha ji is also reciprocating that same feeling, is dittoing that feeling. So any one quick question that we have for Shaurya ji from anyone at this point before we move on to our next speaker? Insightful listening, Indrajit ji is saying. Okay. Yeah, Umaji is saying if you can speak a little bit about the Shiva Tattva in his poetry.
When I say Shiva Tattva, means that every matter, that everything has that that the spark within it. Okay. So Shiva Tattva, that when we say Satyam, Shivam, and Sundaram, so that ultimate thing which can, through which you can connect with, that is the Shiva Tattva. The ultimate through which all is created. And the poet has the vision of it, the poet has a darshan of it. That is very important. And once the poet has the experience of that, then that makes his work of art as a drashta. This is what my understanding is. Beluji, please correct me if
No, thank you. Thank you. No, I think this is fine. Let me, okay. Yeah, okay, there is one question. Can you please share if this poem was composed by Sri Aurobindo in one go or as a final draft? Which particular poem you're talking about? Who? The poem Who? We'll have to check if how many manuscripts are there.
The
I
one,
don't
sir,
remember.
read out now.
Sorry, I
Oh,
don't
the
have
It's
it.
the
Musa,
poem.
Musa Spiritus.
Yes, yes, yes.
That one.
I have no
Yeah.
idea about that.
Do you
Sorry.
remember the details? It should be, wait, I have that. Okay, so it says an early draft of this poem, Musa Spiritus, occurs between drafts of A God's Labor and Bluebird. Sri Aurobindo wrote the date 31 July 35 at the end of a later draft. There are two handwritten manuscripts and one typed manuscript of this poem. So there may have been more than one draft. So, and there is one other question, the interplay between the individual and the collective. I don't know if this is a question or an observation. Indrajit ji, can we just hold on to that question and maybe we can come back to it towards the end? Because I would like to invite, because I know Shaurya ji also has to, okay, he's saying it's an observation. All right, so because before Shaurya ji has to leave, I would like him to at least have the pleasure of listening to Larry as well, because I know you have a train to catch. So
I'll be here till 5:55. So
okay, great.
I'll get a chance to.
Okay, great. So let me then introduce Dr. Larry Seidlitz. Let's see. All right. Okay, so I bring him. Okay, Larry is here now. All right, Larry, welcome. So Dr. Larry Seidlitz is formerly a research psychologist in the US. He's a devotee of scholar of Sri Aurobindo's and the Mother's Integral Yoga and lives near Pondicherry. He's actually my neighbor. And he's been living in Pondicherry since 2004, if I remember correctly. He has authored 3 books and numerous articles on integral yoga. He edits books and articles for other scholars as well on Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga and yoga psychology. He was the editor of the American journal Collaboration from 2004 to 2020, and since 2022 edits the journal Invocation, which is published by Savitri Bhavan in Auroville. He's currently leading the Sunday Savitri Study Circle at Savitri Bhavan and frequently gives talks on related topics. From 2004 until 2024, he was a scholar and instructor at Sri Aurobindo Center for Advanced Research in Pondicherry, that's SAKAR. That's where he and I were colleagues together. And he still occasionally guides students from other universities and participates in seminars and conferences on the integral yoga. So I've had the pleasure of working and studying with Larry for many years at SAKAR, and also we hail from the same university. But we didn't know each other then, but we did our PhD at the same institution in the US. So that personal connection is there. So welcome, Larry, to the collective exploration that we are doing today on Sri Aurobindo, the Seer-poet, and we look forward to hearing your understanding of how you see this theme or this aspect of Sri Aurobindo's poetic work. So all yours.
Okay, thank you, Beloo. It's a wonderful seminar you're presenting here. I am enjoying it very much. When I was studying at the university there, I was studying psychology. And so although I've left psychology academically in 2000, I still have this bent where I continue to look at things from this psychological angle. And so in my presentation now, I also will look at this from a somewhat psychological point of view. And as was mentioned in the previous presentation, Sri Aurobindo, a seer poet, he combines, being a poet, he combines this mastery of language, but also this great skill in poetry. And poetry involves, a great deal of technical ability as well. Prosody, Sri Aurobindo says. He says it's not all, inspiration, but also it demands knowledge and skill in prosody, in meters and language. But today I want to focus on this other aspect, this inspiration. So inspiration is a term that expresses a fairly common experience of an idea that seems to come into our minds from some source of greater wisdom or creativity. And this common experience is a confirmation of sorts of certain basic tenets of Sri Aurobindo's spiritual philosophy, because it suggests, first of all, that there exists a greater wisdom and source of knowledge above our minds. And secondly, that this higher wisdom is in relation and contact with us, and that we can open to and receive from this source of knowledge. So in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, the source of all knowledge is beyond the mind in what he terms the supermind, but that in its transmission to our mind, it passes through various layers of consciousness, which limit and distort the original purity, truth, and power of the knowledge. And the degree of this limitation and distortion can be large or small, and it is this degree that determines the truth and power of the inspiration that we receive and express. So Sri Aurobindo has examined and elucidated this phenomena and process in great detail. And by considering this issue, we open a window into Sri Aurobindo's broader philosophy, but also in his particular ability as a seer poet. And one of the most common experiences of inspiration is in the writing of poetry. It's in that field that we most commonly hear the term. And I want to begin by relating a personal experience of getting some kind of inspiration to illustrate something of its nature. And it occurred while I was writing a short 16-line poem about love for the divine that I titled Love for Thee. So it was a rhymed poem in four-line stanzas with a rhyming scheme AABB. In other words, the first two lines of each stanza rhymed and the second two lines rhymed. The first line of the poem set up the question of the poem. In what does love for thee consist? And the rest of the poem expressed various possible experiences of love for the divine. And I felt that there was a working of inspiration because while writing the earlier lines in each stanza, the following lines, or even their ideas, were unknown to me. But the earlier lines, nevertheless, anticipated the lines that would follow. In other words, it seemed as if the knowledge of the whole already existed in the inspiration for the earlier lines, though it was unknown to my receiving mind until I concentrated on writing the latter. And this seemed to me especially evident in the last stanza, which completely surprised me and went like this. Shall love with wisdom's light be wed? On oneness breast, delight be fed? Then all would be a shrine of thee, all life our love's felicity. So the stanza suggests that the wisdom referred to here is based on the experience of oneness underlying all existences. And that by wedding this experience of oneness with love, we can experience the joy of love in each thing and every being and person that we encounter, which would then become as if shrines of our beloved divine. In Sri Aurobindo's letters on poetry, he explains that inspirations may come from different levels and domains of consciousness. He has explained that above the ordinary intellect, there are several basic planes of consciousness: the higher mind, the illumined mind, the intuition, the overmind, and above all these, the supermind, a radically different type of consciousness. And inspirations and intuitions can come from any of these planes or domains of consciousness. But besides these higher planes, there are also inner domains of consciousness: the inner mind, the inner vital, the inner subtle physical consciousness, and the inmost psychic consciousness. And again, inspirations and intuitions can come from these domains. And in his books, The Future Poetry and Letters on Poetry and Art, Sri Aurobindo has described the nature of the inspirations that come from each of these different levels or domains of consciousness. And he's given examples of poetry inspired by each. And he explains that the highest source of inspiration up until now has been the overmind. And in a letter, he says, "The mantra, as I have tried to describe it in the future poetry, is a word of power and light that comes from the overmind inspiration, or from some very high plane of intuition. Its characteristics are a language that conveys infinitely more than the mere surface sense of the words seem to indicate. A rhythm that means even more than the language and is born out of the infinite and disappears into it. And the power to convey not merely the mental, vital, or physical contents or indications or values of the thing uttered, but its significance and figure in some fundamental and original consciousness, which is behind all these and greater." So Sri Aurobindo has written a vast body of inspired poetry, and much of it can be considered mantric in character. Especially his epic poem, Savitri, has this highest overmind inspiration. And the mother has said that Savitri is a mantra for the transformation of the world. And we may give this sample of a passage from Savitri about inspiration that illustrates this type of poetry. He says, "Oft inspiration with her lightning feet, a sudden messenger from the all-seeing tops, traversed the soundless corridors of his mind, bringing her rhythmic sense of hidden things. A music spoke, transcending mortal speech. As if from a golden phial of the all-bliss, a joy of light, a joy of sudden sight, a rapture of the thrilled, undying word, poured into his heart as into an empty cup, a repetition of God's first delight, creating in a young and virgin time. in a brief moment caught, a little space, all knowledge packed into great wordless thoughts, lodged in the expectant stillness of his depths, a crystal of the ultimate absolute, a portion of the inexpressible truth, revealed by silence to the silent soul. So when we examine Sri Aurobindo's view of inspiration, we find that it is one of several related powers of the supermind. This term supermind we might characterize by a more suggestive term, divine knowledge and power. And whereas the ultimate source of inspiration is in supermind, in the more accessible levels of the spiritual consciousness open to mankind, it also operates in what he calls the intuition, and also what he calls in his writings the intuitive mind. He says, the intuition proceeds wholly by four powers that shape the form of the truth. An intuition that suggests its idea, an intuition that discriminates, an inspiration that brings in its word and something of its greater substance, and a revelation that shapes to the sight its very face and body of reality. So we see then that inspiration pertains especially to an intuitive knowledge as expressed in a form of word and substance. And Sri Aurobindo says the inspiration is of the nature of a truth hearing. It is an immediate reception of the very voice of the truth. It readily brings the word that perfectly embodies it, and it carries something more than the light of the idea. There is seized some stream of its inner reality and vivid arriving movement of its substance. And then in Sri Aurobindo's correspondence with his disciples, he distinguishes between the true intuition and the intuitive mind. And he also mentions these other various types of intuition. So these distinctions would also apply to inspirations, one of the powers of intuition. He says in one letter, intuition proper is true in itself when not interpreted or altered by mind, although fragmentary. Intuitive mind is mixed with mind and therefore not infallible, because the truth intuition gives may be mixed or imperfectly put by the mind. And then, describing the intuitive mind, he explains, mental intuitive knowledge catches directly some aspect of a truth, but without any completeness or certitude, and the intuition is easily mixed with ordinary mental stuff that may be erroneous. In application, it may easily be a half-truth, or may be so misinterpreted or misapplied as to become an error. Also, the mind easily imitates the intuition in such a way that it is difficult to distinguish between a true and a false intuition. And one of the four powers of intuition that I mentioned earlier was discrimination. And one of its important functions is to discriminate between true intuitions and mental imitations or distortions. To set inspiration flowing requires a great deal of preliminary purification and preparation of the nature. And Sri Aurobindo lays out a discipline that can achieve this in his integral yoga, but it requires a long and concentrated work on oneself. And the integral yoga is a many-sided endeavor beyond the scope of this presentation, but several basic principles can be outlined that focus especially on the development of intuition and inspiration. In the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo highlights the importance of the purification of the mind and the vital nature to receive intuitions undistorted. He explains that to rid the prana of desire and incidentally to reverse the ordinary poise of our nature and turn the vital being from a troublesomely dominant power into the obedient instrument of a free and unattached mind is then the first step in purification. And he adds that once this dominance of the vital over the mind is corrected, then the purification of the mind from the intrusion of mental errors and distortions can more easily follow. And one of the principal means for the purification of both the vital nature and the mind is the development of equality, the spiritual equivalent of what is called equanimity. And there are several chapters in the synthesis of yoga that describe this condition of the consciousness and how to develop it. Description can suffice. Sri Aurobindo summed up its essence in an extraordinary sentence in his letters on yoga. He says, equality means a quiet and unmoved mind and vital. It means not to be touched or disturbed by things that happen or things said or done to you, but to look at them with a straight look, free from the distortions created by personal feeling, and to try to understand what is behind them, why they happen, what is to be learned from them, what it is in oneself that they are cast against, and what inner profit or progress one can make of them. It means self-mastery over the vital movements, anger and sensitiveness and pride, as well as desire and the rest. Not to let them get hold of the emotional being and disturb the inner peace. Not to speak and act in the rush and impulsion of these things. Always to act and speak out of a calm inner poise of the spirit. And he adds that whereas it is difficult to achieve this equality in its fullness, we should always try more and more to make it the basis of one's inner state and outer movements. And its importance for the development of intuition and inspiration is that the consciousness must be pure and limpid, free from potentially distorting influences, so that the higher knowledge descending from above may be received in its native truth and power. And in the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo describes 4 lines of progress towards developing intuition and replacing by its action our normal mentality. The first method, he says, is to silence the mind altogether, to silence the intellect, the mental and personal will, the desire mind, and the mind of emotions and sensation, and to allow in that perfect silence the self, the spirit, the divine, to disclose himself and leave him to illuminate the being by the supramental light and power and Ananda. The second approach describes is to reject the normal action of the intellect and instead to listen for the voice, wait for the impulsion or the command, the adesha, obey only the idea and will and power of the Lord within them, the divine self and Purusha in the heart of the creature. He explains that this leads to the experience of the psychic being or soul and is the way most natural to those who have an emphasis on bhakti. The third approach he describes is to refer all our thought and action to the veiled truth of the divinity above the mind, and to receive all by a sort of descent from above, a descent of which we become not only spiritually, but physically conscious. He explains that the lower activity of the mind may still continue, but from this poise, it is easier to achieve the intuitive discrimination that distinguishes the true intuitions from the lower mental mixtures. And interestingly, the fourth approach is to develop our intellect instead of eliminating it, but with the will not to cherish its limitations, but to heighten its capacity, light, intensity, degree, and force of activity until it borders on the thing that transcends it and can easily be taken up and transformed into that higher consciousness. Sri Aurobindo explains that the divine Shakti that effects the integral yoga typically uses all these four various methods freely and flexibly according to the needs of its work and the demands of the nature, leading to the development of intuition and the higher levels of consciousness. And I would like to conclude this discussion concerning the development of intuition and inspiration by noting an interesting conversation of the mother on the different types of intuition in her questions and answers from 1957-1958. And in that kind of longer conversation, she mentions this important suggestion. She says, in the ordinary functioning of the brain, intuition is something which suddenly falls like a drop of light. If one has the faculty, the beginning of a faculty of mental vision, it gives the impression of something coming from outside or above, like a little impact of a drop of light in the brain, absolutely independent of all reasoning. Active thought must be stopped as far as possible, and the entire mental faculty must form at the top of the head and a little further above, if possible, a kind of mirror, very quiet, very still, turned upwards, in silent, very concentrated attention. If you succeed, you can, perhaps not immediately, but you can have the perception of the drops of light falling upon the mirror from a still unknown region and expressing themselves as a conscious thought, which has no connection with the rest of your thought, since you have been able to keep it silent. That is the real beginning of the intellectual intuition. And finally, I'd like to note that Sri Aurobindo encouraged some of his disciples who had a turn towards it to write poetry as a means for developing inspiration and the intuitive consciousness. By turning the consciousness within or above with the aspiration to receive inspirations from the higher levels of consciousness for the writing of the poetry, strengthens the passage to the higher consciousness and facilitates both the ascent of the consciousness to these levels and the descent of their light and power and ananda into the mind and the lower consciousness. Someone had asked a question earlier about whether Sri Aurobindo, I think, had, kind of used the poetry as a means towards the realization of some of the things that he realized, whether personally or for the world. But he spoke of writing Savitri, in fact, as a means for developing his consciousness, for developing, I suppose, purifying, this intuition, the levels of the mind so that he could receive. And in the beginning, when he wrote, he was writing often from the mind or inner vital levels, and sometimes just from the, higher mind or some of these intervening levels of the spiritual consciousness. And he wrote and rewrote and corrected in an effort to develop this purity of the inspirations that were coming down from the supermind or through the overmind in him, until finally he said that he achieved in Savitri a general overmind stamp kind of throughout the poem. Although there may be some variations, it has this dominant kind of overmind consciousness mantric quality to it. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. This was beautiful. I don't know how it happened when you and I exchanged messages about, you said what you want me to focus on, and I said, just go with whatever feels right to you. You just picked that point that had not been covered so far in our discussions and presentations. So I'm just so happy that you focused and zoomed in on this inspiration and intuition as means of, the seer poet, the two faculties that the seer poet uses. So thank you so much. Beautiful, very beautiful. Let me see, there are some comments of appreciation, but there is one question, and I think you may have addressed this intuitively. Probably you knew that this question was going to come up. Chitra is asking a question about intuition. Chitra ji, if you are still around with us, do you want to ask this question yourself, or? Is she with us? Yeah, I see her. Okay. Chitra ji, do you want to add anything to the question, or should I just read it?
Beloo ji, sorry, I got a call suddenly and I quickly closed it. No, it's really just that I heard the word true inspiration and I found it really beautiful in the way Larry explained, but I am not able to fully understand what it means or how through an example or through an analogy we can draw a better understanding of what true intuition is. Because for me, the next step to discriminate from an intuitive mind is I'm not able to understand the first step. So hence the question.
Yeah, in her comment, she also asked, is it an attribute of the supermind, intuition? So if you
So
have.
ultimately, all of these inspirations, intuitions derive from the supermind, but they descend through these intervening levels of consciousness. And in that descent through those intervening levels, they can be more or less distorted, reduced in their power and truth. So, and as they come down, I mean, these intervening spiritual levels of the consciousness, intuition or overmind comes right under supermind. So that's like the highest level of inspirations that has ever been achieved by human beings. I don't know whether, in Savitri, there may be some supermental inspiration coming. I know that in some passages, it's at least coming from the very high levels of overmind, because he speaks of the higher levels of overmind and describes something of their nature. So at least he's able to speak from there. But below overmind, which is a level of consciousness, it's a level of consciousness of the gods. So it's actually quite beyond most, human beings. But intuition is the next level down. And that is a level of consciousness that receives something of the supramental truth, but it receives it like a stroke of lightning. It's like a narrow focus of absolutely true light that's coming down. But it's not comprehensive in the way that overmind is or the way that supermind is. And so quite a few poets, I think, quite a few might still only be a handful or a couple of handfuls of poets over the ages, receive something of this intuitive inspiration from the true intuition. But normally, what would happen in our human experience, even if we're receiving something, some intuition or inspiration, it's coming through this intuitive mind, which is, again, kind of a layer below that, in which the mind, the intellectual mind, is getting mixed with these intuitions. So as those intuitions come down into us, they get received and then limited further and then possibly distorted by our mental constructions, because we have certain preconceived ideas about what truth is. And so whatever might be coming from these subtle realms, we tend to force it into these kind of boxes that we've created through our mental constructions. And in that way, we limit it, and we may also even distort it. So that is kind of the intuitive mind that we have. But still, something it is receiving from above. So there is some truth probably in it, a kernel of truth and purity that's there. But how much the mental intrusion comes into it, how much mental distortion, well, that depends largely on how far we've been able to purify the mind and the vital. So I think that's, it becomes mixed as it descends into our mind, and depending on our level of consciousness and its purity.
Yeah, I think that's why I really appreciate how you focused in on the aspect of purification as well in your comments.
Yeah.
That part is so important, so that this distortion doesn't happen. This, of the what is being received, and the lines that you read from Savitri, there is that image of empty cup.
Yeah.
So that emptying of the cup is
Yeah.
also similar to, the idea of, being a pure receptacle, for which has nothing of its own. So thank you, Chitraji, for the beautiful question and the follow-up explanation that Larry, you gave us. Any other questions from any of the participants? Okay, there is some. Yeah, okay. Shubhajit is saying, grateful, sir, such an insightful talk. Anagaji is saying, Uma is talking about the emphasis on silent mind. Indrajit ji has a question. Indrajit ji, are you here with us? If you would like to speak up, or if you, yeah, he's here. So would you like to share your question yourself, or? Okay, he's saying to read how the transcendent and the personal seamlessly converge to initiate, I would say, to initiate this state of inspiration and intuition in poetic creativity. How the transcendent and the personal seamlessly converge to initiate this status of inspiration and intuition. And as I think we got a little taste of Larry's own poetry, and I forgot to include that in your bio, that you do write poetry. Many of his poems are also published in earlier versions of Mother India. I've seen few, so and certainly other journals. So you are the right person for this question, Larry.
Well, each individual is, like you could say, a unique representative or expression of the divine. And so, we each have this jiva, which is divine in its nature, but it represents kind of one facet of the crystal, of the diamond, of the absolute divinity. So we each have this particular aspect which shines out in our personality. But then we purify the instrument so that the divine can express itself purely through that facet that is our divine self, our divine individuality. Then there is that fusing of the transcendent and the personal. That's where the fusing takes place. It's in that perfect expression of our divine individuality. Our personality, our outer personality, expresses that also, I guess, in some way through our swabhava and swadharma. But again, to the extent that we align ourselves with the truth of our individuality, which is also expressed in our psychic being, then we express that naturally. We're only going to express this particular aspect that we are of the divine. We can't express it in its absoluteness, but we can express our particular aspect of it.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
that's all.
Thank you. I remember there is a conversation of the mother also in her in the context of artists. Some question was asked about art and yoga. When she was asked this question, she spoke about that each artist has to first make a unique individual contact with the divine to express that in his or her painting. So she was talking in the context of painting. So I think it, in a way, it is the individual divine, the divine within, and how that gets expressed through the artist, through painter, through poet. So that part is also there. So thank you. Well, it's been 2 hours, and so I mean, it's just, I think we can go on and on, but there was that one question, if anybody would like to take up. I don't know if Shaurya ji is still here or is he on commute. Larry, would you have any insight into that one question that we put aside earlier? Does anybody recall which that question was? Not, I mean, the about the question, the poem "Hail to the Fallen," but
how he could know about that?
Yeah, that's right. Right. So yeah, I think there was one answer given about Trikal Drishti, but anything else anybody would like to add? Shaurya ji or Larry, anything, some last? Narendra ji, I don't know if your audio is still working or if you would like to use the chat box to share something before we come to the conclusion. I'm just going back to the old chat and see if I'm... Yeah, the poetry means for the, I think you've addressed it, Larry. Was poetry a means for the great seer to alter or transform the reality? You talked about Savitri means as a means for ascension of consciousness that Sri Aurobindo himself has talked about. So yes, but yeah, shaping the reality in some way, I guess, if you want to take that up to create. I think Shaurya ji mentioned about how the poet's vision is different from the vision of a logician or analyst or one who looks at the world events or what's happening from a totally different drishti. So a poet, a seer poet particularly, seer poet's vision for shaping or creating the reality, that in itself, we saw the example in the dwarf Napoleon, and of course the Hail to the Fallen as well. But if there's anything else, Larry, you would like to add on that point?
Well,
I want to say.
Okay. Yes, Shaurya ji, go ahead.
So I just wanted to say that wherever I stopped, Larry has taken up from that point, because the points which I have covered, that he is a poet and he is a seer, that what he sees, but how he sees, that what we fantastically discussed and in very detail and deliberately. I didn't touch those parts because I thought that it will take much time of mine to include. But thanks, Larry, that you have covered the point which I deliberately didn't take up in my presentation. So in a whole, it was a linked up that who is seer and how he sees. Thank you.
Yes.
But you set me up perfectly.
Sorry?
He set me up perfectly. He kind of gave the overall vision and then...
Yes. So it's really how Mother and Sri Aurobindo arranged everything, because one thing flowed perfectly into another. And I mean, again, I think that, and I don't know whether you two had communicated at all beforehand, but the way one presentation led to another, to the third one, it is just so beautiful. And I think the seer drishti, the drashta that Sri Aurobindo, I mean, his grace was very much there as the flow happened. So that, thank you so much for doing that. Yes, Shaurya ji, we see you at the station. So thanks for joining again. Any final comments or reflections or sharings from any of the participants? Yes, Larry, go. Please go.
Well, I just thought, I mean, I'm always amazed at how conversant Sri Aurobindo was on all these world events. I mean, it's just amazing. He talks about these things in a lot of his early conversations, like with Narod Baran and those people and from early on. I mean, he just had an extraordinary knowledge of what was going on in the world. So I don't think I'm so surprised that he was kind of knowing about, this Ethiopian leader. I mean, I heard of him, but of course that was many decades later. But yeah, I mean, he was totally up to date on what was happening all over the place.
Very much so, very much so. Yes, so I think, and just Anaghaji, you're absolutely right. It is no coincidence that we are, enjoying this presence of Sri Aurobindo during this, through this satsang on today's date, December 7th, just between December 5th and 9th. So it's really how Mother's planning works. So I really want to take this opportunity to just thank each and every one of you to spend more than 2 hours with us. Some of you have had to leave for various reasons earlier, but really it was beautiful. We will be editing the recordings maybe in 2 parts, and they will go on Sri Aurobindo Society's YouTube channel. So thank you so much once again, and have a beautiful rest of your evening and a beautiful Sunday ahead. Namaste. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Shaurya. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
All of the
Thank you.
participants.
Thank you, Dayas. Thank you,
Pradeep
Beluji.
sent a beautiful message earlier that he had to leave, but he wished us the best for the rest of the program. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.